in person. I just want to let you know before we get started, this session, as you probably heard, will be recorded. That's number one. Number two is we have captioning and sign language interpretation. And number three is I would love for all of us to really have an amazing session where we can come together as a community to have a really great conversation around disability inclusive democracy as we do this launch event today. So I'm really thrilled as the U.S. Special Advisor on International Disability Rights to be doing this event with our amazing partners from Australia government, DFAT, Andrea Cole, and IFES, International Foundation Electoral Systems, Virginia Atkinson, the Inclusion Advisor for IFES, as we launch the Disability Inclusive Democracy Cohort. So let me just take a step back and really illustrate how important this event is and how important this is to the Biden administration and to the democracy conversation and dialogue. So November 2021, we hosted, the US government hosted the first Summit for Democracy. And this is an important commitment for the Biden-Harris administration in terms of how to really bring together countries, governments, civil societies, the private sector to discuss the importance of building democracies and making sure that everyone's voices are heard. And when we say everyone's voices are heard, that means we also need to make sure we're including the 15% of the world's population, which is individuals, persons with disabilities, 1 billion. When we're talking about building a democracy, when we're talking about political participation, when we're talking about building peace and prosperity and security across the globe, we need to make sure we're including the voices of persons with disabilities. And not just from a point of, which is still important, accessing voting, polling booths, but how do we make sure persons with disabilities are able to politically participate across all aspects of our democracies? So from Summit Democracy 1 in 2021, we had countries come forward and made commitments around democracies, around different topics and themes of democracies, including disability. Since then, we've been able to host a series of events, including at the UN Conference of State Parties, including at GLAAD, which I'll talk about in a sec, establishing a working group there, but also bringing this launch event to fruition. And if it wasn't for Australia DFAT, if it wasn't for IFES, and if it wasn't for these amazing leaders really bringing this together, we wouldn't be here. You know, next week will be Summit Democracy Phase 2, and President Biden will be hosting it along with Costa Rica, Netherlands, Korea, and Zambia. And countries will be coming together and discussing the importance of, how do we continue discussing the challenges around democracies? What are innovations? What are commitments? And how can we continue taking that forward? Because, when we're looking at the globe and we're looking at so many different challenges and so many different crises, that's when democracies are at challenge, right? How do we make sure that during those moments, persons with disabilities and everyone else are heard? So before I hand it over to our amazing partners of crimes, right, here in this session, I want us to be thinking about a few different things. One is, I would love for us to be thinking about how can this cohort be an important space for the disability community and the global community at large? What are things that we hope to get out of it? What are ways that we can really make sure that we are addressing the important challenges when it comes to disability inclusive democracy? What are discussions and conversations that we should be having that we're not having? Who should be at the table that is not at the table? Who should we be talking to that we bring people forward to this topic? How do we make sure that when we talk about, in the disability world, nothing about us without us, which is so important? How do we even take it a step further and we say nothing without us? How do we make sure we bring in people with disabilities into the democratic process, not just to disability related issues, but to all issues across the board, across the sectors? Because we see the value, including our voices in the democracy. Because let's be real, when we are not included, our society, our economy, and systems at large are not fully tapping into the full potential and value. So those are the questions I want us to be thinking about. And I would love for you to be writing in the chat box any of your thoughts, any of your questions as we move forward in the session. I do want to before I hand it over to our amazing speakers, I do want to talk about, we are co-chairs of GLAD this year and last year. GLAD, the Global Action on Disability. It's a network focusing on disability inclusive development. And during GLAD, we were able to this past year establish a disability inclusive democracy working group. That working group will be in working coordination with this cohort. We want to make sure all these different systems and platforms are coming together so we can continue discussing and addressing the challenges and really showcasing and sharing best practices, good practices, promising practices, innovative practices around disability inclusive democracy. Thank you everyone for being with us today. And I'm excited to hand this over to Andrea Cole, the Director for Disability at Australia Government at DFAT. Over to you, Andrea.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. Really pleased to be here and have so many people online and interested in this important topic. My name is Andrea Cole, as Sarah said, and I would like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I am located today. I want to recognize and acknowledge their continued culture, spiritual and historical connection to the land, and would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. For those that are unable to see me, I'm a fairly short, petite, white woman with shoulder-length, light brown hair, and I wear glasses. Today, I'm wearing a green 3/4 sleeve shirt with an Indigenous print of large white oysters on it, which I purchased because it reminded me of my husband's coastal lands on Nookana country in South Australia. As Sarah said, I am the Director of Disability and Social Inclusion section at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I lead a small team of wonderful people, and together we are the policy leads for Australia's international engagement to advance the rights of persons with disabilities, whether that be through the multilateral human rights system or helping to ensure that Australia's aid program involves people with disabilities and improves disability equity and rights in the countries in which we work and partner. Some of you online are old friends, and many we are meeting for the first time, and I welcome you. Today, I'm going to, my part of the panel discussion is to focus on an overview of the objectives, the structure and the operating principles of the cohort, and then indicative actions and outcomes. So perhaps if I could ask Rebecca to share on the screen the disability cohort concept note. I should note that's a draft concept note, and I'll speak to this in the first instance. Firstly, I would like to talk to the objectives. We have 3 objectives. Perhaps, Rebecca, if you want to scroll down, or am I in control? One moment. Yeah, super. So first I'll talk to the objectives. We have 3 objectives. The first is to support the meaningful engagement of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in democracy, governance, and public policy. The second is to promote access to voting, political participation, and civic engagement locally and globally. And the third is to mainstream disability rights across all areas of public policy. Our starting point for establishing this cohort was, what more can we do to galvanize action to strengthen inclusive democracy? But what does inclusive democracy even mean? It's often understood to simply mean political participation without discrimination. And while that is clearly important, we wanted to go beyond that. For us, inclusive democracy is about equality, participation on an equal footing with others, social justice, and social recognition. Equality in terms of both civic and political equality where all citizens have equal influence on the collective decision-making of a political community, and civic equality underpinned by the equality before the law. That is, not only should all those affected by public policy and laws be nominally included in the decision-making, but they should be included on equal terms. So this is to ensure that there's the equitable sharing of social goods, that people with disabilities and other marginalized groups can contribute to social justice, and through the process, we can strengthen social recognition. In this vein, we sought to ensure the objectives spoke to some of these principles. We want to think, how can we support meaningful engagement of people with disabilities in democracy, governance, and public policy? Just as Sarah Minkara spoke of, and the first time I heard her recoin the phrase from nothing about us without us to nothing without us was around the Global Disability Summit. And we want to take that as our mantra behind this cohort and think about how can we break down the silos and ensure people with disabilities are not only part of the conversation, but empowered to contribute. And that's what really Objective 1 of the cohort is speaking to. In addition to OPD engagement in governance and public policy, we also need to ensure that the foundations are in place. And this is captured under Objective 2 in promoting and improving access to voting, political participation, and civic engagement. And finally, we need to break down the silos. We need to effectively mainstream disability rights across all areas of public policy. Now, we recognize those objectives are ambitious, and we're not remotely suggesting that we're going to tackle the systems within which we work as a whole. But you'll each know your own contexts and know how we might be able to contribute and make a difference. And a key tenet of the Summit for Democracy and its cohorts is to generate commitments and galvanize action so as we can strengthen inclusive democracy, governance, and policy. The second area that I'll talk about today is the structure. So Rebecca, if you could scroll down a little bit so we have the three groups up. So the cohort will be structured into three groups. The first is a general group. So that's for those of you that have an interest and wish to advance the objectives of the cohort. And from this, we would look for members to make at least one commitment that contributes to the cohort objectives. Then there will be within that general group, a core group. And this core group is for those who wish to involve themselves more closely and be part of the advisory committee of the cohort. So in addition to contributing to how the cohort might operate and achieve its objectives, we would also seek members from this group to assist in holding events or activities that might help us advance that cause. Ideally for this group, we would seek a broad cross-section of members with representatives from different geographic regions or types of organizations, such as, OPDs to government to private sector, a broad cross-section of expertise and knowledge, in addition to a diversity in age, gender, or type of disability. Finally, there's the leadership group, which is in essence the co-leads of this cohort. So that's Australia as the state party and the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which is the CSO party. And we are committed to coordinating this cohort and funding, implementing, or contributing to at least one major program that contributes to these objectives. Thirdly, I'll talk about the proposed operating principles of the cohort. And Rebecca, these are not outlined in the concept at the moment. And I should say that on the principles, as well as other aspects of the cohort, that we'll be looking to seek members' views to ensure that it is as collaborative as possible. So let me explain the operating principles as some proposed operating principles as a start that will speak to that. And in fact, that's what my notes just said. We will look to seek input through the core group and then put that out to members and revise these principles accordingly. But at first, based on discussions with my co-lead, IFES, the way we envision it at this stage is that we want to cultivate a collective responsibility. We all as members have different experiences, different knowledges, different strengths, and different biases. And while we have established the cohort and set the objectives, we want members to contribute and shape how this cohort will operate, how to make this useful and meaningful, and most importantly, achieve the outcomes and change. The core group will be a key mechanism to contribute to this, but we'll also think of ways to ensure all members have a chance to contribute. And within the next month, we'll seek to call a core group meeting to discuss and agree how the cohort will operate and the next steps to galvanize action, which will be shared with members for feedback. The second principle is we want the cohort to be accessible and seek to foster an inclusive, safe space for everyone to feel that they can contribute. You know, it's through the contestability of ideas that we can grow and seek to affect change. The third principle is that the cohort will take an iterative approach, building on the ideas put forward from the members on how the cohort will deliver change, and then we'll seek to develop and improve processes as we go along. The fourth principle, though, will be the balance, the counterbalance to the iterative approach, and that it will be time-bound and accountable. This is to be further discussed with the core group and members, but we initially propose that after a certain period of time, say 6 months, we'll seek members to be clear on the commitments and or activities that they're going to make to contribute to the cohort objectives, and then we'll discuss and agree on mechanisms to ensure accountability. In the next section, I'll talk about some early ideas we have around that. So fourthly, I will talk about indicative actions and outcomes. So Rebecca, if you can bring back up the concept note, I'm back on the concept note. And scrolling down, yep, perfect. So I'm not going to go into the detail of all of the actions and outcomes, and they are indicative actions and outcomes. So this is where I want to reiterate again that these actions and outcomes will be discussed with the core group and with members, and we're very happy for the ideas to evolve and grow in response to your thoughts and ideas. But as flagged on how do we ensure it's time-bound and accountable. One idea that we had is that we are keen to use the Global Disability Summit in 2025. We think it's a nice period of time, which is sort of just over 2 years. I'm not sure when in 2025 it's going to take place, but it's about 2 years. And therefore, it's a 2-year framework for us to work with and work towards. And I think it would be really great if we could aim to have something to report against in terms of the commitments we have made and the progress that we have made in advancing disability inclusive democracy, governance and public policy. But in addition to that, use that period and the work that we do to leverage it to encourage participating governments in particular, but also other stakeholders to make substantive and concrete commitments to advance inclusive democracy, governance and public policy. We all know, well, myself especially as a representative of a state government, how long it can take for state governments to come to get buy-in to and come to a commitment, a substantial commitment, and we want to use the period prior to the GDS to build that buy-in and garner that commitment. We also want to leverage the work of the other Summit for Democracy cohorts, in particular the cohorts on youth, gender and election integrity. We have already and will continue to advocate for strong disability rights in the wider Summit for Democracy process, including in the upcoming Summit Outcome Declaration for the upcoming Summit at the end of this month. We want to break down silos and ensure people with disabilities are engaged in policymaking processes at all levels, whether that be on climate change, governance and public financial management, resilient economic growth, social sectors, peace building, humanitarian work, etc. How do we ensure that those doors are open and that people with disabilities are not only in the room, but empowered to contribute and affect change? We want to, of course, build on the really strong foundation of work that our partners such as IFES and many of you in the virtual room have, and that's where Objective 2 really comes to bear, and that's about strengthening the foundations of promoting access to voting, political participation and civic engagement locally and globally. And I think IFES has already been doing a lot of work in the space around developing disability inclusive resources, toolkits, and good practice examples. How can we ensure those are getting out there and being used by partners and the like? And finally, we want our members to make concrete commitments to contribute to the objectives of the cohort. So, for example, as will be outlined in the concept note, there's an example from Australia and the US, and we're working really closely with the ASEAN member state governments and organizations of persons with disability to accelerate regional and national implementation of ASEAN's enabling master plan and to mainstream disability rights into pandemic recovery and disability inclusive development practices. So with that link to commitments, I'll hand over to Virginia, who's going to talk through some of our ideas, initial ideas for the commitments to begin to stimulate your thinking. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrea, and good morning, good afternoon, or if you're in my part of the world, good evening. I'm Virginia Atkinson, the Senior Global Inclusion Advisor at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, or IFES. I am a white woman in her early 30s. Oh, I said 30s, actually 40s. This may be some wishful thinking there. With light brown hair, glasses, and today I'm wearing a blue top. I am really excited to see many familiar faces here in this virtual Zoom, or familiar names listed here in the chat. But for those of you that don't know, IFES is an international NGO that works in countries all around the world on issues related to democracy and governance broadly. And we have a 4-person team here in Washington, DC, our headquarters, focused on sharing good practices and lessons learned on disability rights. We have staff based in all of our different country offices that are specifically tasked with working on disability rights. And of course, we have partnerships with many of you on this call and with OPDs in all of the countries where we work. So we're really looking forward to collaborating with as many of you as possible on this Summit for Democracy initiative. I'm going to speak about the sample disability rights commitments that we have helped to collate. And these are, as Andrea mentioned, draft commitments and have been gathered via a series of consultations. A couple of them Sarah mentioned, including an event at last year's UN Conference of States Parties to the CRPD, and at a Global Action on Disability Network, or GLAD meeting that Sarah mentioned. And so through these different mechanisms, as well as through some more private consultations that we have had, we have collated all of these sample commitments. That said, we really intend for this to be a living document, and we would encourage you to adapt or contextualize however you see fit any of these commitments as appropriate for your country context. So they're definitely not set in stone, and we're hoping that they're actually going to help just spur conversation and thinking around disability inclusion and democracy and governance. The commitments are organized into 2 main categories. One is those that states can make at the national level, and then the other is those that countries who provide overseas development assistance can make to inform sort of their internal processes and the programs that they support. And the intention is that OPDs, other civil society organizations, the private sector, all of us can help support governments in implementing those sample commitments. So each sample commitment, Rebecca, if you could scroll down a little bit, each sample commitment is cross-referenced to other Summit for Democracy cohorts. So Sarah mentioned a little bit about the structure of the Summit for Democracy and how the first one was in 2021, and now we're having the second one this month. There have actually been 16 different cohorts that have been formed. Some are focused on inclusion-related topics, such as gender and youth, and of course, disability rights. Other cohorts are focused on areas such as elections, technology, media, and anti-corruption. So each of our sample disability rights commitments is also cross-referenced to a relevant cohort from the Summit for Democracy. And each of these cohorts is operating a little bit differently. So some of the other cohorts have also produced sample commitments, and we've worked with some of them to help mainstream disability rights across all of their commitments. Because of course, I know we all agree here on this call, it's most effective if we take a twin track approach, where we have, very specific targeted work focused on disability rights, and also mainstreaming and integrating disability into other topic areas as well. So one example that I think is really great to highlight is from the youth cohort. They have as one of their sample commitments to proactively create mechanisms to hire young people into governmental roles. And it specifically mentions including hiring young people with disabilities. And so that's in the youth cohort sample commitment, and they are using that with all of their advocacy with government stakeholders as well, and encouraging governments to take on that commitment. A really good practice example of this being implemented comes from the Dominican Republic, where an internship program was created specifically for young people with disabilities. And 2 young people with disabilities were actually hired as permanent employees as a result of this internship program from the first cohort of groups in that program. So we'll continue to advocate for mainstreaming disability rights across all of the Summit for Democracy areas, as Andrea mentioned, but we will also be advocating for implementation of these 30 sample commitments that we've put together. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'll highlight a couple examples of the sample commitments and then give some good practice examples of countries that are already doing these things. And that's how we know that they work well and that they're good commitments to make. So as Andrea noted, a key goal of this cohort is to support meaningful engagement of people with disabilities in all areas of public life. And in many countries around the world, as will not surprise any of you, I know, people with disabilities are not included or consulted in legal or policy reforms. So one of our commitments is our sample commitments is hoping to address that gap. And that is to establish mechanisms for inclusion of people with disabilities in all legal reform initiatives. And a really good example of this is actually quite recently from Ireland, where they have established a parliamentary committee to monitor implementation of the UN Disability Rights Treaty. And it is called the Joint Committee on Disability Matters. And people with disabilities have a direct mechanism through their website that they can consult and join and be involved in the work of this parliamentary committee. So these commitments are framed as things that governments should implement, but civil society organizations can and should support. So for example, one other sample commitment is around establishing consultative mechanisms between election management bodies, legislators, political parties, and people with disabilities and their representative organizations through working groups or the establishment of MOUs. What IFES often hears in our work is that, unfortunately, disability rights is not seen as a topic where government stakeholders have staff that are specifically responsible for it. So we often, as advocates, have to go and sort of ask for the goodwill of our government stakeholders in order to work on disability rights. And so that is obviously not how things should be happening. So these more informal mechanisms of establishing working groups and informal mechanisms of MOUs can help sort of codify the inclusion of disability rights in government. And a great example of the impact that this type of initiative can have comes from Sri Lanka. In 2017, a working group was formed there, comprised of members of the Election Commission and of Sri Lankan disability rights organizations. And since its formation, so about 5 years ago now, the group has conducted audits of polling stations and made recommendations and adaptations to those polling stations, developed a tactile ballot guide so that people who are blind or have low vision can vote unaided and in secret. They've developed accessible voter education information in Sri Lankan Sign Language and easy to read. And the group also designed content to address issues of social stigma, discrimination, and the use of derogatory language, in particular against people with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. And as a result of that advocacy, the Election Commission actually made a statement and asked all political parties and media to stop using derogatory language. And the chairman made a public statement reaffirming the rights of Sri Lankans with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities to vote. So that, you can imagine, has a big impact when a senior government official recognizes in the first place that this is an issue, and then also publicly makes a statement about it. And that all came about through this working group that was formed as a collaborative mechanism between government and civil society. So this example really shows how impactful our work can be when we meaningfully collaborate. Then lastly, I'd like to just give one example from the second category of commitments that I mentioned, those that are related to overseas development assistance. So if you could scroll down a little bit, Rebecca. One sample commitment in this category is to develop a guidance note for embassy staff or other government officials on meaningful engagement of people with disabilities in democracy and governance development work or foreign policy. And a really good example of this in practice comes from DFAT, which requires mandatory online training for all of their staff on disability. So not just people that are focusing on disability rights in their work, but so that everyone has sort of a baseline of knowledge and brings that to their work, whatever their topic area is. I think we all also would all agree on this call that disability inclusion should be the responsibility of all government stakeholders. So these types of trainings can really go a long way in terms of building allies and champions for our work across government. So we hope you'll find the sample commitments useful in your work, but again, we'd encourage you to adapt or contextualize them however you would like. I will just quickly wrap up by discussing some next steps. And if you have any questions, please raise your hand or type them in the chat, and Sarah, Andrea, or I would be happy to answer. But as Andrea mentioned, if you're interested in joining the Disability Rights Cohort, you're going to find a Google form that Rebecca's going to pop in the chat right now that we would ask you to please fill out to express your interest. Don't worry, it's really quite short. It just asks for your organization name, a contact person's name, a short description of why your organization would like to join the cohort, and then how you found out about the cohort. And there's also a section where you can indicate if you would like to join as a general member or a core member. And we do also have a button you can click if you're not sure right now how you would like to engage, but you just know you would like to receive sort of future communications from the cohort. So we have those three different options. And as Andrea mentioned, later this spring, we're going to call a meeting together, arrange a meeting together for the folks that have expressed interest in being part of the core group. And in that meeting, we'll discuss and hopefully agree on how we'll operate and next steps that we can use to galvanize action on disability inclusive democracy. And we'll be sure to share all of that for feedback. And we hope that by including a wide range of government, civil society, and private sector stakeholders, we will have sort of like the best of all worlds and can really make some impact in this space. So thank you all for your time today. And I will leave it there, and please let us know if you have any questions. I'll turn it back to Sarah as our moderator.
Okay, great, amazing. Thank you so much, Virginia, and thank you, Andrea, for both of your presentations. So we're gonna turn it over now to Q&A. Please feel free to unmute yourself and speak out or write in the chat box if you have any questions or any comments. This will be a really great time and space for us to really engage on any kind of questions or comments we have regarding this cohort. And Virginia will help me if people are writing in the chat box to read it out.
So we have a comment, Sarah, in the chat box from Shazid Khan, who said, I had the chance to visit Australia recently, and I was amazed by seeing their NDIS program for people with disabilities. I understood that NDIS is an outcome of a strong political commitment of the government. I understand it's only a democratically strong government can take on such a program. Unfortunately, in Bangladesh, this is almost absent.
Okay, amazing. Andrew, do you have anything to comment on that?
I guess just to say, I mean, and the NDIS is a really amazing program. It's a social protection program, and it's about ensuring people with severe disabilities are getting the support that they need to live life independently and reach their and do with it what they would like. But it's actually quite a small proportion of people with disabilities. So I guess that's the first thing to say, that it's not the panacea to ensuring an inclusive approach to people with disabilities. It is one piece. It's a really important piece, but in some ways it's a piece that needs to be considered as part of the whole, I guess. I think it's an interesting point. I don't necessarily believe that only strong democracies can do it. There are a number of countries that come to us and ask us about the NDIS, and they are a really diverse range of countries. I know India, for example, has an interest in it, but actually a lot of Middle Eastern countries have come to us and asked us about the NDIS. So I guess to say that, but I do agree with the comment about it did come about from strong political commitment. And this is where I think what's really important is building the capacity of and empowering organizations of persons with disabilities and helping to create the space for them to be part of the conversation, to be able to continue to promote and advocate for the change that they feel they need in their context at that moment in time. And you know, a system such as the NDIS may be it, but in a different context, it's going to be different things in different contexts at different points in time. And the people on the ground, the people most affected, need to be in the room arguing for that. So I think the cohort, which is about you know, strengthening civic engagement and ensuring and supporting meaningful engagement from OPD, speaks to that. Over.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Andrea. That's really, really great. Any other comments or questions or thoughts?
So Patrick Robbery has put in the chat, hi, thanks for the information. I'm wondering if admission to the cohort is only contingent on interest in disability rights, or if there's other criteria.
Oh, I mean, and I'll turn over to Virginia and Andrea, but ultimately, you know, we want everyone and anyone that's joining this cohort, they don't necessarily have to have a certain expertise or interest, but we're all working towards the inclusion of persons with disabilities and their voices in the democratic process. So, you know, ultimately, everyone, we encourage everyone and anyone to be part of this process. But Virginia, Andrea, do you guys want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I would like to add to that. I think a really key thing that we would like to do through this cohort is potentially, I should get rid of the caveat word. What we want to do is begin to break down silos and mainstream disability across all public policy. To do that, we need allies and champions from across the board. So strongly encourage, and we can think about how can we ensure we get people from perhaps a wider mix of experiences to help us better understand how those things work and where our entry points are, where our opportunities are. So I think it's an interesting point, and one that we'll consider to how can we ensure that the membership reflects the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So thanks for your question, Virginia.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think we would like as much participation as people are interested in doing, and also we're going to learn from each other. I think that's also part of it. So you don't need to come, you know, as considering yourself an expert in this topic. That's part of the process, is learning from each other.
Exactly. Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. Really good question. Other questions or comments? And feel free to unmute yourself if you're comfortable speaking.
So Sarah, I see someone has raised their hand, but I can't figure out how to. Rebecca, can you? I'm Chandra. I see
a few questions in the, still some more questions in the chat as well, Virginia, but I'll leave that to you and Rebecca to manage.
Okay, I think I've just now seen Ramchandra, forgive me if I've butchered your name, from Blind Youth Nepal. We could unmute.
Yeah.
I don't think folks can unmute themselves. So Rebecca, can you unmute? Ramchandra, you're in now.
Yes. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thanks
Hello.
for this opportunity. Hi, this is a wonderful program and the concept we truly appreciate. My name is Ramchandra, and I am the General Secretary of Blind Youth Association Nepal. This is the national level OPD, and we are trying to work on a political participation, democratic process, and the accessible electoral system. Currently, we have a very good experience under our partnership with IFES. So from our almost 20 months program, engaging the government, politician, parliamentarian, civil society, as well as persons with disability, what we truly understood and realized is there is a significant knowledge gap among the parliamentarian and politicians about disability inclusion. So what we have realized is this may not be the intentional ignorance. However, they really don't know where are the people with disability. Can they be the contributing members in the political process or not? Because this has not been ever discourse in their political agenda or the manifesto. So it's very, very important to have our own visibility there. So that's why this kind of national and international coalition and continuous momentum is very much required. So that is our strong belief and observation, and as well as appeal, just outcome of the IFES partnership program in Nepal. So we really want to express very deeply and very keenly that Blind Youth Association and other OPDs from Nepal are also interested to be part of this cohort, either in a core member or general member, but the detailed process will be communicated later. But thanks for this opportunity. I just wanted to let that, people, when it comes to the political participation or the democratic movement, when it comes to the disability, generally, there is a less political division among the politicians as well, because the issue itself is very sensitive. And when we involve them in explaining our issues, generally in the disability inclusion, they come into the one political agenda despite of their own political ideology. That's all I wanted to express. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your comment, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing and your colleagues, and definitely share this opportunity with your fellow colleagues on the ground in Nepal. And I'm gonna see if Virginia or Andrew, do you guys want to comment on what he said?
Do you want me to comment, Virginia, in the first instance? I also noticed, thank you for your comment. I also noticed that Shahzad Khan in the chat forum made actually a very similar point. And I agree full-heartedly. And it's one of the things that we will think about, including how we perhaps can capture that in, in a sample commitment and in the work that we're doing. I know some of the work that we're already doing, we are doing that, but how can we look to ramp that up or build on the lessons and make it more effective and the like? I think it's highly pertinent. Over.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrea.
So Sarah, a couple comments that are similar in the chat, asking about sort of the time frame that organizations would be committing to. And if there was sort of something said on that. Andrea, I'm going to say no, there's not. But we would, I think, appreciate just knowing sort of what is your level of commitment and how would you like to be engaged? Andrea, does that cover it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's some aspects too about the time frame, but it goes a little bit deeper than that, which is eligibility criteria as well. So I guess to say broadly in the time frame as flagged, we were talking about working up towards the GDS in 2025. Now that's 2 years. I don't think if you had wanted to join the core group for only 1 year, we were going to say no to you because you can't commit for the 2 years. But, you know, if we get some momentum going and you wanted to commit for, like, you know, the 2 years, I to say Australia and I believe IFES, do let me know otherwise, Virginia, that we're bought in for the next 2 years. We think it's going to take that long to begin to lay the foundation for the change that we want to try and affect. And that's also why we want to leverage the GDS to be able to build on that foundation to keep it going in a really substantive kind of way. But beyond 2 years, we can't see beyond 2 years. So I think that's, for me, what Virginia and I are committing to at this point. But I don't think there's any rules that would say we would like, at a minimum, I'd say a year in the core group. Would you say fair enough, Virginia? And as for eligibility criteria, there's a question about eligibility criteria to be interested in the group, specifically in the core and the leadership. At this point, and we are actually going to have further conversations about this, at this point, we're not opening up the leadership group. We may open it up. We want to think about how to open that up and what we're trying to achieve by opening that. What we are opening up is the core group. I personally don't have any particular criteria. I am encouraging to have a nice broad section, cross section of, you know, as I mentioned, regions, age, diversity, etc. But we'll need to gauge the level of interest and see what comes in. But Virginia, I welcome any additional thoughts on eligibility criteria.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple questions that are asking also about membership as part of an organization versus an individual's membership. So definitely please fill out the form if you're an individual and you're not necessarily a member of an OPD, but you are a disability rights advocate and would still like to be engaged. We would also welcome your participation. And then there's a comment from Rosemary. Hi, Rosemary from Guyana. I was just there in January and we just met, so excited to see you. And she says, I believe that in Guyana, we will find the sample commitments extremely useful because we have already started the work on including people with disabilities in the political process. And she said very kindly, with the support of the team from IFES Guyana. So that is actually a really good plug for everyone else on this call. If you can please take a look at those commitments and maybe share them with your government officials. If you're going to be going in to have a meeting on inclusive education or accessible transportation or any of the areas that I know you're all working on, please bring those commitments with you and share them with your government and let them know that there's this Summit for Democracy process happening and there's the disability cohort, and would they be interested in making any of these commitments and working in partnership, of course, with you all to implement those.
And I just want to add to a point what you said, Virginia and Andrea, and I think to the few questions and comments. You know, as we want to break down the silos and really diversify, you know, who's part of this cohort and the core members. I would love for us to keep on thinking who else should be part of this, what other sectors. Let's make sure we have the private business sector part of this conversation, media sector, et cetera. I think, how do we keep on amplifying kind of this issue and these work and really create more shared responsibility across the board. Okay, other comments or questions?
I see one, again, it's sort of, does the core cohort have levels of membership within the general and the core group, such as OPDs, individuals and stakeholders? I think, Virginia, you were speaking perhaps to this, but I guess just to clarify that at this point, we weren't looking to break it down in terms of levels within those memberships. So, you know, we'll be interested in the group that you're representing, but we're not looking to break down the groups that way.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrea.
I was just going to say there's also a comment from our colleague from Bangladesh, again, Shahzad Khan, who said, I strongly feel that the peak policymakers of countries like Bangladesh can be educated through good practices adopted by disability-sensitive countries like Australia, New Zealand, UK, Sweden, Canada, to learn about how our society and country could be a bit more disability sensitive with people with disabilities. So I think, yes, I fully agree with this. And it's also, I think, important to note that all those countries listed also still have work to do in this space. It's an area I think that we all can improve on still, and hopefully learn together and make the process more accessible.
Yeah, we all have work. And I think there's that beautiful thing. There's all these amazing, best and good and promising practices all over the world. So there's a lot of hidden gems across the globe. So how do we keep on sharing those? Definitely. So last few minutes, any final questions or comments before we wrap up?
Somebody has written one final comment that I saw: as the group suggests engagement of government and private sectors, will we be sharing the information? You know, and I think, will there be other mechanisms? Yeah, I think for me, it's an area that I would like feedback from, as I said initially, the core group, but then going out more widely to the general group on how we can make this the most effective disability cohort to achieve its objectives. So as already discussed, you know, the role of policymakers, parliamentarians is really important. You know, how can we begin to think about ways to engage with them? I think in addition, we need to really have a clear strategy about how we engage with our with state governments and partner governments, because I think they're so critical to getting on board. But as I alluded when talking, that's a slower process, and it's one that takes time of you know, in terms of engagement and buy-in. And this is where I think a group like this is really important. How can we, through this group, you know, all work to our various strengths? So, you know, perhaps if it's in a partner government that Australia works with, Australia combined with an OPD that really understands that context, or another actor in development partner, or other actor that works in that space, how can we come together and jointly be meeting with the government in talking about this and presenting the case and getting their buy-in to, you know, and this is again, you know, but this idea of this lead up to the GDS in 2025. It's going to take sort of that long to plant the seed, to get the buy-in, to get them to commit, et cetera, et cetera. So agree full-heartedly, it's in our minds of how do we begin to engage partner governments and other actors that we don't normally engage with. And in that sort of first core group meeting, or the second or the third, we're going to continue to workshop this, come up with all your ideas from your own experiences and contexts, and begin to unpack that. So it's a really important point. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrea. I just want to, you know, as we wrap up, Virginia, is there any other final comments before I wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, and we're at four minutes to the hour. So
okay, awesome.
Everyone.
Well, a huge thank, you know, first a huge thanks to Virginia and to Andrea and to their teams for making this launch event happen. A huge thanks to also my team as well. And for the Summit for Democracy team. As we wrap up, one thing is I do want to make sure people check out the summitfordemocracy.org website. There's a lot of virtual events happening next week. Definitely check it out. There's a Civil Society Day. I think it's on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely go check it out. I do want to thank everyone in this room, you know, for your work on the ground, for your commitment towards disability inclusion, disability rights, for really coming together, participating in this launch event, and keep on, I would say, sharing the word around this, you know, galvanize more individuals to join. There's a lot of momentum going on, and as we move towards the next 2 years into the Global Disability Summit, right, there's a lot that can happen, a lot of change, some that are, you know, more immediate than others, but ultimately, how do we create change that's sustainable across the board? So thanks for everyone joining us today, and I hope if it is an evening, please have a wonderful night, and if it's the next day in the morning or afternoon, please have a beautiful day. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Virginia. Thanks, Andrea.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, looking forward to engaging with many of you going forward.
Absolutely. Good night, good morning, good afternoon.